Welcome to the Transport Leaders Podcast, where we discuss the breakthrough ideas and bold solutions transforming the future of transport around the world. Join a global community of transport leaders, professionals, academics, and advocates as we unpack transport's toughest challenges and spotlight the strategies driving real change, from system reform levers and political realities to sustainability and technological disruption. Join me, Graham McCabe, and Russell King and our guests as we offer expert perspectives as we discuss ways to transform our transport systems. G'day everyone, I'm Graham McCabe. I'm founder of Step Advisory, an independent transport planning and traffic engineering firm, and I've worked in consultancy and government for over 25 years across Australasia and Asia.
And good afternoon, I'm Russell King. I'm the editor and founder of the Transport Leader newsletter and blogcast. I've got about 20 years in transport policy.
Okay, Russell, this is going to be a fun one. What are we talking about today?
We have a fun topic today, Graham. I think this is going to be an interesting one, I think, with us perhaps agreeing too much with each other, but it's going to be high-speed rail in Australia. So, Graham, you've been in Australia a lot longer than I have.
Yes,
right.
Yes, my entire life. But why are we just doing Australia? Why aren't we doing America and the UK as well? The failing Anglosphere.
There are we could do all of those, but I think let's focus on Australia specifically today, because we've recently had a release from Infrastructure Australia, who review the business cases for major strategic projects in Australia, and they have just finished reviewing the business case for high-speed rail from Sydney to Newcastle, and it's got some interesting findings, I think it's fair to say.
Yeah. And just for everyone's context, given the time lag of when this might come out, so this is late October 2025 when this review came out, and it's the latest in a long list of business cases, research reports, investigations, going back to the 1980s. And if you want to see a deep dive on high-speed rail, I recommend the ABC comedy series Utopia and the episode on high-speed rail.
Yes, it's brilliant.
It gives you a good summary of all the failings.
Yes, it is a brilliant episode. I mean, the show's fantastic anyway when it comes to infrastructure stuff generally, but it's particularly strong on this one. We have been debating high-speed rail in Australia for 40 years or more.
I think the first major report was like 1986.
Yeah, and before the current business case, there was a one for the entire route, I think, between Brisbane, Sydney and Melbourne, which was produced in 2013, and that had a benefit cost ratio of just over 1.
Yeah, and in between 2013 and 25, there was a New South Wales higher speed
faster rail.
Pardon?
Was it faster rail? Was that?
Yes, faster rail. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Business case and study as well.
Between Sydney and Newcastle.
And various other cities.
Yeah.
So we spent an exponential amount of money on studies since 1986. I think each time the cost of the study doubles and the value derived halves.
Yeah. So let's start with high-speed rail generically, right? Because I think both you and I, as anybody who's listened to our earlier podcast will know, we are public transport fans. Okay, we are not public transport skeptics by any stretch of the imagination, and that includes rail.
Yeah.
Right. And I've certainly travelled on high-speed rail in a number of different countries, and loved it. And I'm someone who loves high-speed rail. So let me set that out right from the beginning.
Me too. Okay? I think it's fantastic. Yeah. Even fast rail, the 180 to 250 kilometre hour mark is fantastic.
Yeah, I'll be honest with you. I love slow rail as well. Having done overnight trips on rail lines in various countries, in various continents, I've always loved, doing a slow overnight train trip as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, I love trains. Bit of a train geek in training. I'm not really a full-on train geek. There are people who are far more informed than I am.
Yes. Yes.
So the question then becomes, if we're big high-speed rail fans, why are we not convinced by high-speed rail in Australia? Okay,
Well,
so
yeah, well,
high-speed
yeah. Well,
rail does
let's talk
brilliantly
about the
in,
purpose of it of high speed rail.
yeah,
So you want to connect. So you have multiple cities, not just two, that you want to connect where you're getting seat turnover. So it's actually like any transport system. You want your seats to turn over. It's not like an aeroplane where you want to take people from A to B and that's it. You want to connect cities together, and then you want to use those connections to actually expand the reach of the transport system. So, you think, everybody talks about Shinkansen or uh, Chinese high speed. They have lots of stops and they have lots of service patterns. Shanghai, Beijing, which has two parallel high speed routes and is going to get a third or a fourth, they have lots of stopping patterns. They have lots of intermediate routes. It's not just A, B.
yes. Now, it's great in China, it's great in Europe, it's great in Japan, okay? It's not so great in North America, but we'll cover, but maybe we won't
Oh,
discuss that too much.
Morocco.
Okay?
Morocco.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. So,
Turkey.
so why not Australia? Because like lots of people who are advocates for high-speed rail, that's what they point to. They say, all of the most, progressive, forward-looking nations, they have high-speed rail. We should have high-speed rail in Australia too. You and I are both high-speed rail fans, and yet we're saying, hold on a minute. What's wrong with the context in Australia? What is it, especially for both domestic and international audience? What's different about Australia about why we're not convinced by high-speed rail in Australia?
So we have one of the busiest air corridors in the world, Sydney, Melbourne, which takes about an hour and a half flying, takes about 4 hours total if you're including, getting to airports, arrival, blah, 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 back into the CBDs. But Sydney Airport's 10 kilometres out of the CBD, Melbourne's more like 30. So it takes a bit of time. A high-speed rail between the two would be about 6 hours CBD to CBD on older technology. So if we bought the latest and greatest, the trains that are in the 360 to 400 kilometre an hour mark, then you'd be around 5 kilometres. So that's two big cities with by the time any high speed is built, 10 million population each. There's one reasonably sized city between them, which is Canberra, which will be about 600,000 people. And then you've got a bunch of smaller cities in the 50 to 100,000 along the way.
Yeah.
But unlike places where you have high-speed rail connecting those smaller cities, they're not compact. Each of those smaller cities is very spread out.
And that's actually true of the bigger cities as well, which is a problem.
Yeah.
Right? In that Sydney and Melbourne, by international standards, are very low density and very large geographically.
Yeah.
Right? And so your benefits are dribbling away because there's large parts of the cities that are just miles and miles and miles away from wherever the station is going to be.
Yeah.
Not good connections to get to them. Then
we don't have those density around the station. So the lines that China has built, they've built a station and they've built a brand new city, and the brand new city is really compact.
Yeah.
And the cities in Japan. So you have, so I like to use Atami, which is a smaller city on the Tokyo Osaka line, has a population of 40,000 people, but the population density is 600 people per square kilometre.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, per hectare. It's not per square kilometre. That would be very not dense.
We got, but it's a much more dense city than anything that we've got in Australia.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fundamentally, the reason Australia doesn't have high-speed rail and it's never got up historically is because Australia is a very big country, right? And the major population centres are a long way apart. So the two biggest cities, Sydney to Melbourne, and as you said, is the world's busiest, air, or one of the world's busiest air corridors.
Yeah.
Okay, that's 1,000 kilometres.
Yeah.
Right, and so it's very expensive to build the high-speed rail because of those distances, and because you don't have large population centres in between, you don't really make, you don't get the benefits. The economics don't make sense in terms of the number of people that benefit, and that's fundamentally at a sort of very high level why this thing hasn't flown. But this wasn't about Sydney to Melbourne. This business case is Sydney to Newcastle. Now, how far is Newcastle away from Sydney?
250 kilometres.
Yeah, so it's 250 kilometres to the north of Sydney, and its population is about 180,000, something in that region.
The greater area would be 500,000.
Yeah, but again, going back to our point about density,
yes,
right? It's another very spread out, very low density city. Okay,
yeah.
And the greater region, sort of the Hunter area, as it's known, is very, very low density and very dispersed.
Yes. Yeah, and so most of the suburbs will be 10,000 people, and they will be large in the context of a global comparison. So still lots of properties that are 600 to 800 square meters with a single, so a quarter acre with a single family dwelling on it.
Yeah. Now the Sydney Newcastle also has an added problem, doesn't it? Which is the topography of the route from Sydney to Newcastle is challenging, should we say?
Yeah. Well, so you could go international best practice method and keep near the surface as much as possible. So viaducts, short tunnels, bridges. But the current and most recent previous proposals are for extensive tunneling. So 60 kilometres odd worth of tunnel.
Yeah, so in this case...
To put in context, is the same distance of the tunnel between the main island of Japan and Hokkaido under a strait that's 50 kilometres long.
Yes. And so we're talking about 60% of the line would be tunnelled in this case, in the business case, I think it is. All right.
So it's not till you get about 100 kilometres north of Sydney that you're actually getting into land that is good for building at grade high speed rail.
Yeah, because it's not just that it's full of like ups and downs and coastal features and all those sorts of things and need for cross rivers. It's also got things like national parks and preserved areas that there will be very strong objections to if you're trying to put a rail line through.
Yeah. And old underground coal mines as well.
Yes, so the Hunter region is a very significant current and historic coal mining region, which often causes instability in the area.
So it's really interesting because this business case, the business case review, we haven't seen the business case. We've only seen the business case review. So these things may change in the interim. It says they looked at 13 stops and decided on 3 between Sydney and sorry, two intermediate stops between Sydney and Newcastle. A stop loosely called Central Coast, which, based on previous studies, will most likely be in a town called Warnervale, which doesn't actually have that much, has a regional shopping centre, no density of housing, no density of employment, and then another stop loosely called Lake Macquarie, which will probably be somewhere around the towns of Morisset or Toronto. And if you think I'm a bit dismissive of Warnervale, you should take a look at Morisset and Toronto as potential towns.
This is not Toronto, Canada.
No.
In any way whatsoever. The only similarity would be the name and nothing else, I think it's fair to say.
Yes. They are regional suburbs, I think would be context. They are suburbs that serve the greater Newcastle, Lake Macquarie area, but they don't have a significant population or employment levels.
Yeah. So we have a problem in that the number of people that are going to benefit from this because of the dispersed nature and the low population relatively is relatively low. So that makes the benefits commensurately low. But because we're tunneling a lot, the costs are very high.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So the BCR, depending on the assumptions that you make and the discount rate that you get, optimistically is just over 1.05, but pessimistically could be as low as 0.1 or 0.2, right, in terms of the benefit cost ratio. So we're not in, and it's right, they've got a range depending on the assumptions that you make, etc. But it does feel like it's well south of 1, which might not necessarily be a problem if this project is stage 1 of a much more comprehensive project that has a very strong business case. And certainly this is stage 1 of a much more comprehensive, high-speed rail network. So we need to think about that, and we can talk about that later as well.
Yeah, well, and one of the things that we also didn't mention is that these two station locations, half of their catchment is eaten up by waterways. The Central Coast Station has Brisbane Water and Budgie Lake, and the Lake Macquarie Station, unsurprisingly by its name, has a very large lake on one side of it. So even if you want to build the housing, what is it? Something like 120,000 dwellings that they say will, help derive the benefits of the project. You're still restricted in the locations where that you can put it, and you can't build a good supporting public transport network because you have these geographical constraints that mean that you can't build a high quality prioritized frequent bus system that has lots of density because of the geography.
Yeah. So
you can't feed the people to the stations.
Yeah. So in terms of the business case, about just under 60% of the benefits are supposed to come from housing. And about half of the housing is kind of directly as a result of the project. And the other half of the benefits seem to be about opportunities for people to downsize downsize from larger homes into sort of retirement homes, new families moving in kind of explanation. Sort of reduction in household size, I think, is the way it's put in the IA review. And Infrastructure Australia also sort of challenges that assumption on whether it's how strong it is. But that's so the most of this is about housing. So it's not about travel time savings. It's not about mode shift. It is very much about or emissions reduction. It is all about housing, or a very large chunk of it's about the benefits are about housing.
Yeah, and I would say that housing assumption around downsizing is heroic, because if you think okay, so you're building a new high-speed railway station, then you're going to put all this dense housing around it for downsizers. So who are the downsizers? Are they professionals in their mid-50s who have decided, well, I don't want to live in the city anymore, I'm going to move out, but hey, I've got a high-speed rail, so I can buy an apartment? Or are they retirees? So where's the economic value of giving retirees who are downsizing into these well-connected locations access to a fast train, because their value of time is actually dropping significantly because they have more time on their hands. That
So
they may have more money, so they're willing to pay a higher cost for their travel.
yes. So we are in a situation where we have a extremely challenging project in terms of the benefit cost ratio. Okay. But but in terms of let's make it even harder for ourselves, we're doing that as well in this context. So one of the things Infrastructure Australia highlights is it's written in nice bureaucratic language, but effectively it says this is being rushed. And that's really important because one of the key lessons from mega projects for infrastructure around the world, okay, the core principle is spend your time upfront planning and then execute quickly. Do not rush the planning, and then, because what you end up doing is executing really badly. And that's when costs massively shoot up and when time scales are constantly delayed, as we're seeing in California, and as we're seeing in High Speed 2 in the UK. So the principle is you make sure you've got your planning right up front, test your assumptions, make sure you've got your design well thought through, you've made the important decisions that you have, etc. That's a really key principle. Infrastructure Australia is quite clear that the time scales that it's, the time allowed to deliver the business case meant that it was rushed.
Yeah, and there's very clear flawed decisions in there. So one of the comments in Infrastructure Australia says you've put 60% of the entire route in tunnels, and then you've said, well, we want to minimise the size of the tunnels, so that's resulted in a top speed of 200 kilometres an hour, which, without having seen the actual business case or being part of the decision making, says to me, well, if you want to get a magic number in terms of the time to get to Newcastle, you need to increase the speed on the sections that aren't in the tunnel, which means you want to have fewer stops.
So these are the trade-offs, right? That you're having to make.
So they've made a trade-off of trying to reduce. So they've reduced their capital cost in two ways. One is to have a lower speed in some sections, and then a higher speed without stops in other sections. But they haven't gone, well, for your heroic Sydney Newcastle trips, you can actually have intermediate stations.
Yeah.
Not just two. And then that can actually, you can have more new towns where you can put population and you can have density and you can have multiple stopping patterns. Whereas they've just gone, okay, what's the lowest cost, fastest time option between Sydney and Newcastle?
Yeah.
And the fact that they've actually got two intermediate stops is obviously a political thing.
Let's get on to the politics then.
Yeah.
Right? This is not being rushed because the High Speed Rail Authority, who's been created by this government to deliver on the business case and go on to build high speed rail, that's not because they've done that through choice, is it?
Well,
at least that's not my read. I mean, I don't know.
No, well, I
know
the 2013 study was extremely comprehensive, and then in the meantime, New South Wales government went in a different direction with the faster rail, which was part new alignments, part city building, because at one point they wanted to focus everything on Western Sydney Airport rather than the Sydney CBD. So you have, and then now they've gone to another new alignment, which is, basically, from what I know from the previous investigations, is keep underground, make sure you get under the Hawkesbury River, keep underground through the national parks. So everything's designed around that rather than the utility of the system. So they've increased their costs by massively by going, well, we don't want to create any issues, so we'll do tunnels, because tunnels are popular in New South Wales, but that means we increase the costs, so we will have fewer stops, so we can have faster time. And so it is all very rushed, and it's all very, it's as a result of political time pressures.
So I think it's probably important to provide context for everybody in this space, right? The 2013 business case, okay, was commissioned by the then Minister for Infrastructure, if I remember correctly, and that was one Anthony Albanese.
Yes.
Okay, that same Anthony Albanese is now the Prime Minister and is the one who's commissioned the current business case for high-speed rail and has set up the High-Speed Rail Authority. So this isn't just a project that a government is thinking about. This is a personal project for the Prime Minister as well.
Yeah, and in the meantime, there have been other high-speed agencies within governments which have been created and abolished various times. But the thing that's really interesting to me is they didn't just pull the 2013 one off the shelf and go, okay, well, what's changed? What has materially changed that we have to revise in order to build this project? They went, let's start again from scratch and add in all these additional impediments to the project.
Yeah,
and that's the thing that is actually the really interesting bit for me, because the decision to keep it completely underground. No minister has publicly said we want it underground.
Well, so this is a really interesting point. Okay, so high speed 2, I think, is perhaps one of the things that's influencing their decision making in this.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so HS2 in the UK, original plan, not a lot of tunnelling.
Yeah.
Okay, they then start community engagement, and I think it's fair to say that it's a complete shit show. There are huge objections from local MPs, including in the governing party, objecting to the high-speed rail being above ground in their area. As a consequence, ministers continually agree to tunnel instead of going at grade, dramatically increasing costs and dramatically increasing timelines. And that's one of the challenges that HS2 has had in a significant way. Now, because the topography of this route from Sydney to Newcastle has similar challenges, and it's going through places of natural beauty, I think they're getting on the front foot and going, this will be a similar problem on community engagement. Okay, so let's just get ahead of that and just go with tunnels from the start. And I think that's one of the reasons why tunnelling has been a preferred option to avoid all of those. And Infrastructure Australia hints at that in the review, saying, you're worried about the environmental reviews on these things, and that's one of the reasons, the logic for doing the tunnelling, to avoid those sorts of problems. And I think that's it's a reasonable assumption, but as you say, it creates all sorts of other unintended consequences in terms of A, cost, but B, also and in terms of your overall configuration and times, between stations, etc. So it's not a perfect solution. Okay, is it the least worst one? There'll be lots of debate about that.
Yeah.
I think the problem you have is any configuration you choose is problematic, right? Do I think it's like, oh, I don't agree with the Sydney to Newcastle high-speed rail because I don't agree with this configuration, but if you swap it to this configuration, I think it would work. Personally, I'm not in that camp. I don't think there's if you go upgrade with all of the different aspects of it, yeah, you might get it down from, say, 60% to 50% tunneled. Do I think it will work? I still don't think it stacks up.
Yeah, the 2013 designs, they primarily used existing alignments within Sydney, and there was some tunnel, but it was more achieving required curve radiuses for high speed rail.
Yeah.
A lot of property acquisition, admittedly.
Just to keep you clear on this, this is a really important point on high speed rail.
Yeah.
Okay, you need it to be as straight as possible. All right. Bends are not good on a high speed rail. All right.
Well, you just have very large radius curves. And then as it got to the northern edge of Sydney and needed to cross the Hawkesbury, that it used there was a bridge or a tunnel option, but it was a short tunnel option, and then using short tunnels to carve through the various pieces of escarpment in order to get the required alignment. Whereas now it's just tunnel the entire way, a single tunnel from central Sydney to effectively Gosford, which is 60 kilometres north of Sydney.
Yeah.
And so you go, okay, well, there's at least 3 locations within Greater Sydney, well, two, possibly 3, where having a stop would make sense. So you're losing all the passengers. So you're losing people who would be willing to pay for a short trip, and you're losing passengers from Newcastle on the Central Coast who are going to those 3 CBDs.
Yeah.
And then when you get and then you've got all the additional cost, and you're still not providing a fast service. So the faster rail project, which was targeted towards doing incremental projects so that in the future you could run high-speed trains. Like, even at the moment, our interurban trains between Sydney and Newcastle have a top operating speed of 160 kilometres an hour.
Yep.
They're limited to 130 kilometres an hour on the straights. So we, having something that actually joins the 2 cities together properly is critically important. Does it need to be an average of 250 kilometres an hour, getting that miraculous 1 hour travel time between the 2 cities? Probably not. And Rory Sutherland, the Ogilvy advertising executive, one of his criticisms of high-speed rail too was, well, maybe if they spent $100 million on really comfortable seats and really good Wi-Fi, people wouldn't care about the 30-minute travel time saving.
Yeah, I mean, it's also fair to say that the travel time saving benefits in the business case are very small, a very small proportion of the benefits, right? It's not like we're relying on travel time savings to justify the business case in this. It's only a small proportion.
Yeah, it's the housing and agglomeration effects of enabling people between cities to come and meet in person and things like that.
Yeah. Now, timing is also an issue, because one of the things that Infrastructure Australia highlights is that we're expected to have around a 35% shortfall in engineers in New South Wales at about the time when they're hoping to build it, which is starting construction in about 2027.
Yeah.
Right. So we have an issue in terms of workforce. Now, of course, that's exacerbated because within Australia, we also have in Brisbane the Olympics in 2032. So although it's not, one for one in terms of workforce, there are people, Labor is going to be heading towards heading for the Olympics to help deliver the infrastructure required for the 2032 Brisbane Olympics. Then there's another couple of problems as well, which is this is Australia's first high-speed rail. We do not have a lot of high-speed rail expertise in the country. Ideally, we were tapping to the international market of high-speed rail expertise. One of the additional challenges is that Canada is looking at doing its own high-speed rail project and is a little bit further advanced than Australia is right now. And also Europe has recently released ambitious plans for more high-speed rail, for example, connecting Lisbon to Madrid as one of many high-speed rail projects
Yeah,
that we want to see.
the 2040 network.
Yeah.
Okay. That at the time of recording was released this week.
Yeah. Right. So there's a lot of people who want to build a lot of high-speed rail. That is going to put the expertise available at a real premium. And so we're rushing a project. There's going to be a lack of people to build it. Right. It's a very challenging thing anyway. It doesn't feel like that this is de-risking this project.
No, and the ironic thing, and this will probably get me lots of haters, is there is one country in the world where they're actually starting to wind down the construction of the high-speed rail network, and they have an immense labour pool of technical experts.
Oh, who's that?
China. But of course we won't purchase from them.
You say that? Maybe.
Yeah, I think in the current IT security infrastructure world,
Environment. Yeah.
that it would be a challenge. I mean, and the the sheer volume of specialized construction machinery that they've got for high-speed rail projects, and the engineering technical expertise, and the train control systems, which is all ECTS 2 that's come out of Europe, so European Train Control System. Sorry.
ETCS, yes.
Yeah, going into jargon there. So we've got so the Chinese, the Japanese, the Spanish, the French, the Italians. Probably wouldn't go to the Germans at the moment, given how Deutsche Bahn needs its people to be working on improving.
Right. Yes.
But they're not English-speaking countries.
Okay, so we've got a problem in terms of labour supply as well. We have a problem in terms of rushing this project, and we have a problem in the business case. Yeah. Right? Let's talk about the strategic case, though, okay? Because this is only stage 1 that's been assessed, okay? And the broader vision is for a connection from Brisbane to Sydney to Canberra to Melbourne, okay? Connecting the entire eastern seaboard of Australia, or a large proportion of the eastern seaboard of Australia. Yes. So we could have a low BCR on the first stage of this project because the wider vision is there, and that you're going to deliver this wider high-speed rail. Okay, and people talk about this as nation building, and they talk about it as intergenerational. And therefore this is the project that the country needs. So, is it justified from a strategic perspective?
So, I think Sydney, Canberra, Melbourne, yes. Brisbane to Grafton, maybe. So Brisbane to what, 400 kilometres south of Brisbane, so in northern New South Wales. So you have that coastal strip of Brisbane, Logan, Gold Coast, Tweed, which is migrating further and further south. There's a gap in between Newcastle and Coffs Harbour / Grafton of about 500 kilometres, where you're getting outside the range of benefits and also limited populations.
Okay.
So if all these country regional cities, which are all on the coast and really beautiful, were willing to have massive population increases, and just air quotes, destroy the lifestyle, then yes, you would have something that was viable. But we have 2 train services a day between Newcastle and Grafton at the moment. Okay, train's really slow. It's not comfortable. Doesn't really connect you to anything at the moment. So it's the why does nobody swim across the shark infested?
We don't need a bridge.
Infested river. Yes, yeah. You can't really say because nobody's doing it because the service is terrible.
Yeah, but you said something interesting. Okay, and I don't think I agree with this. But you said the Sydney, Canberra, Melbourne thing stacks up strategically. So why do you think it stacks up strategically? Because I'm much more skeptical than you.
So Sydney, Canberra, there is a real demand for a good rail service. So there are lots of commercial buses that are doing that trip at the moment. There's a lot of people travelling by bus to Canberra.
Which takes about 3 hours for those.
Yes. Yeah. Whereas at the moment the train takes 4.5 hours and it runs 3 times a day.
Yeah.
And it's a painfully slow trip because you know that you could have driven it in 2.5 or got on a bus in 3.5.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful trip. If you got time on your hands, take it. But it's so getting Sydney to Canberra down to an hour or an hour and a quarter would actually really well connect the 2 cities together. And then you do have a string of large regional cities. So you've got Wagga Wagga, then Albury, then Shepparton on the way to Melbourne. So you've got these large regional cities where there is already a travel demand. So Melbourne to Albury and Shepparton along that corridor, there's about 10 or 12 trains a day at the moment. And you speed those up, you will have super commuting going on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The question for me though is, all right, this isn't like for me on the because we're talking about ballpark cost. Well, the Brisbane to Melbourne business case of 2013 put the cost, I think, at just over 100 billion. Right? On today's prices, I mean, we've seen construction costs have gone up well above inflation, so it's probably closer to 200 billion now. Right? That's a hell of a lot of money. Okay?
It is, yes.
Right? So you have to deliver huge amounts of benefits. Right? Now, when I look at what people talk about in terms of benefits, one of the things they talk about is, moving away from flights in order to reduce emissions. Okay? So there's flights between Sydney and Canberra, 45 minutes approximately. And we talked about Sydney to Melbourne, being one of the world's busiest air corridors.
Yeah.
But the challenge I've got, the problem I've got is, by the time you've built high-speed rail all the way down to Melbourne, which would be optimistically in the 2050s, right? By then, we'll probably end up with at least close to zero emissions aircraft through things like sustainable aviation fuels. So the question for me then becomes, does it just, are you better off investing some money in sustainable aviation fuels, which benefits not just the Sydney to Melbourne corridor, but actually much broader challenge in aviation? So in terms of the emissions, I don't think it stacks up personally.
Yeah.
You then end up with a lot of the stuff is around enabling housing. So I have, and one of the things here is people go, oh, it stops us having, to cram in people into Melbourne and Sydney when they're already full, right? And by international standards, Sydney and Melbourne are very, very low density cities. There is plenty of room for them to grow without having to move people hundreds of kilometers away and then empowering them through high-speed rail. Not only that, all right, but you've also then got, if you do move people into regional areas because you've improved high-speed rail, they will drive more. They may not drive when they're driving between Melbourne and wherever they now are regionally, but in that regional area, they will be car dependent. Okay?
Yeah, well, and that's my issue with it, is that unless you do new compact towns associated with the stations, you are just creating more car trips.
Yep. So what about productivity as well? Okay. So where do you want to, Australia has a productivity problem. So we have had about a decade of productivity going nowhere, and if anything, we're going backwards per capita in terms of productivity. So the question then becomes is, where do you want the housing to go to support productivity and make people better off? The answer is you want them in the city, in the major cities. Those are the most productive parts of Australia, and you want people in those areas to boost the productivity. So you don't want to put the housing in new areas or regional areas from a productivity perspective. I'm not saying there aren't other good reasons for putting the housing there, but from a productivity perspective, you want to be building them in Melbourne and Sydney and Brisbane.
Yeah, you want to make the most efficient use of the existing services.
Yeah. So you're not getting the benefits in terms of emissions. You're not getting the benefits in terms of housing and where you want to be putting your housing. So now, can I see a scenario where the business case becomes more compelling over time as the population of Australia increases, assuming it does continue to increase significantly over the next 5 decades?
Yeah.
And and that might be up for grabs given the demographic collapse in many parts of the world at the moment, right? But that for me then says preserve a corridor, right? Preserve the corridor, okay? Now's not the right time. And the other thing I would say on this is, because when you're talking about a $200 billion spend, which is a hell of a lot of money, right, is what could you spend that $200 billion on instead, right?
Yes.
Now,
and that's where I come from. So is that, like, in the 40 years, we have spent $0 on doing curve easing. So curve easing for non-rail people is exactly what it sounds like. You take a tight curve and you stretch it out so that you can run faster trains.
Yeah.
We've spent $0 on curve easing.
Yeah.
We basically in the early 2000s stopped doing level crossing grade separations.
Yeah.
And so another thing that speeds up train. So we couldn't, if you took even a quarter of that money and you spent it on improving the existing rail network, building bypasses of all the windy bits, and then you put 200-kilometre-hour trains on those bits, you would get a travel time between Sydney and Newcastle of an hour and a half or 2 hours rather than 3 hours. And another thing we need to do is we need better trains. Our trains in Australia, comfort-wise, facilities-wise, they just suck. With the exception of the tilt train in Queensland.
And I think there's been a lot of looking at that Sydney to Newcastle corridor and whether you can upgrade it to get better travel times, etc. But the business case has never stacked up because of the cost of it on that topography, right? So it still has always hindered that particular business case on it.
Because
there's also
the same, but the fare structure is also the same as So we don't have for our intercity trains, so our greater metropolitan areas, we have a really flat fare structure. There is one class of travel. We used to have, until the late 80s, we had multiple classes of travel on our intercity trains, and that was all gotten rid of. And it's so there's no, of course, the case doesn't stack up for doing curve easings or short new tunnels, because the marginal increase in revenue and the marginal increase in patronage will never pay for themselves. But if you have a program which is, like the faster rail program was, which is getting you towards those things, and I know there'll be the naysayers and the doubters who say, no, high-speed rail is a completely different standard. You have to build it from day one. Which isn't true, because the Shinkansen is from Tokyo to Osaka has had lots and lots of progressive upgrades. When it opened, it was 160 kilometers an hour.
Well, we have had
50 years worth of upgrades.
We've had a lot of challenges in terms of justifying the case. But the other thing I have a problem with is, in terms of transport more broadly, not just rail.
Yeah.
Okay, there are better things we can do with this money, right? 200 billion. So at the moment, we spend less than 0.2% of our budget on on our roads, of the roads budget in Australia, on active transport, right? For this sort of money, you could upgrade every major city in Australia's, cycle network massively, right? We're not spending less than 0.2% because our cycle network's already fantastic, right? It sucks, and it sucks in every city, right? That would be one example. But you could similarly, for that sort of money, you can spend, you can build metro lines, you can build light rail, you can build bus rapid transit corridors. We can significantly improve transport in all of our capital cities, not just, and I'm just talking about the 30 billion, say, from Sydney to Newcastle, right? So when I look at that opportunity cost, okay, and all these cases, by the way, would have a business case often, if it's a good project, right, of more than 2.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's plenty of opportunities for good projects with very high returns, okay, that would deliver benefits much sooner, okay, and are also generational and will shape the patterns of our cities for generations to come. Okay, where I get to, I think, is, can I see a scenario where high-speed rail may be justified in the decades ahead? And the answer is yes, I can see a scenario where that is. Do I think that is there now? No. Population is just not there. Do I think, therefore, what we should do is preserve a corridor? Yes. Decide on what the route is, preserve the corridor. Okay? Spend the money on the corridor. It's relatively cheap compared to doing it. There's other things you can do with the corridor now to earn a return on those corridors as well. Put on solar panels and those sorts of things on the corridor, those sorts of things. Okay? And therefore, you've always got it so that at some point in, say, 50 years' time, it may make sense. Then you can go and build it. But now, spend the money on other things. Or
well, that's what I'm saying, is improving the intercity rail system that exists should be one of those things. I'm not saying that you spend all of the money on it, but the other thing that I would say the highlight from the business case would be these 120,000 new dwellings. Well, if you're going to build them in compact cities, those compact cities should be self-sustaining anyway. So go ahead and build these cities to create that demand that you say will be there for the travel. That would be really putting your money where your mouth is. Say, preserving the corridor and saying we will build the new cities to create the demand for the rail system.
Yeah, and I think one of the things here is and I'm no economist on these things, right? Is if you take the Sydney to Newcastle route, is it really being anchored by people commuting into Sydney, whether it's from Newcastle or the Central Coast? And people, by the way, commute from the Central Coast already into Sydney. Okay, this would just make it much more attractive to be in the Central Coast and commute into Sydney more often. You know, is that rather than producing a Central Coast which is a thriving economy, or a Newcastle a thriving economy in its own right?
Yeah. So about 30% of the adult population, the workforce from the Central Coast, commutes to Sydney every day.
Yeah.
Which is why we have sections of 3 and 4 lane freeway and trains that are full at the moment.
Yes.
So there's an existing lifestyle demand that is driving, pardon the pun, people to move to the Central Coast and commute to Sydney, and primarily to the northern part of Sydney, which would not get a stop
in the high speed
rail.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think our summary is it fails on so many aspects. This version of this project.
Preserve the corridor. That would be my view, right?
And if somebody from the High Speed Rail Authority wants to come and prove to us otherwise, we would love to have that discussion, wouldn't we, Russell?
Can I actually make a very good point about this? Right? Is I know quite a few people have worked on the business case, and I know the CEO of the High Speed Rail Authority. Right? They are great people, like high quality professionals. Okay, I just think they're working on a dud project. Okay, yeah. Something that I don't think stacks up, and I think that's been driven by politics rather than sensible infrastructure planning. But I don't think that's their fault.
Yeah, and it's when I'm working with people on developing a strategy, when we're at the very start of developing the strategy, it's like, what is your outcome? Don't give me an output. Because if your output is an average speed of 250 kilometers an hour or 1 hour travel time, I know your project is going to be wrong because you haven't actually determined what the outcomes are.
Yes, and we made this mistake with Metro West, where there was a bunch of people who were insisting that you had to have 30 minutes between Parramatta and the CBD, and didn't understand when you build a metro project, it's about the accessibility that's pretty important, and that means lots of stations in between, not 30 minutes between Parramatta and the CBD.
Yeah, lots of stations with density, with bus routes that are going north and south.
Yeah, 100%. Right, and we didn't understand what metro is supposed to deliver.
Well, and with the other great metro in Sydney, North West Metro, which was originally going to be a heavy rail route and then was turned into a metro route, but they didn't increase the station density in the process.
Yeah.
So
see my blog for criticisms, and the like lots of things I love about metro, but some of the things we got wrong was lack of stations.
Yeah.
But
yes,
anyway,
we built a high-speed automated suburban rail network.
Yes. Anyway, I think it is worth us wrapping up at that point, Graham.
Yep.
Thank you very much for your time today. It was really good to talk to you about high-speed rail. We will have to wait and see now what the government's response is to Infrastructure Australia's review. But given the Prime Minister's personal interest in this project, I'm sure that we will see it being given to the next stage, where I think they have asked for another
$670 million.
Yes, to take it to the development stage.
Yeah. So again, we're recording on 14th of November, so the National Rail Conference, Ausrail, is being held at the moment, and I believe the Infrastructure Minister may have made an announcement about the next stage of funding going ahead.
Huh? I will
Yeah.
have to look into that then and see where we've got to.
Yes. Okay. All right. Well, yeah. To wrap up, thank you, everyone, for listening and watching. We hope you've enjoyed the discussion, and I'm sure you will have comments about this topic. And if there's any other topics you'd like us to cover, let us know. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and as I said, comment. And if you'd like to buy us a coffee on YouTube or Patreon, links will be in the blurb below. Thanks, Russell.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thanks for listening and watching, and we'll see you next time.